Welcome to this special deep dive from the Remedify Coaching Program podcast. I am your host, and I'm genuinely excited to guide you through this really fascinating and complex material today.
And I'm ready to jump in. Our listener, the learner, has really challenged us this time with a dense stack of sources, and they're all focused on one thing: methodology.
Right. And our mission today is super focused. We want to be really clear about this.
Yes, we are not here to debate the merits of different faiths. Our job is to analyze the arguments presented in this material. We're going to show you how to take these complex, century-spanning truth claims and evaluate them methodically.
Using a rigorous, established set of criteria.
Exactly.
And the subject matter is, well, it's massive. We're looking at the historical and theological criteria used to evaluate prophetic claims. And specifically, our sources today dive into a very structured critique.
It's a critique concerning why Muhammad is historically and theologically considered a false prophet, but, and this is the key part, based predominantly on established Christian and historical evaluation standards that came before him.
That's a crucial frame to set right now. We are unpacking the methodology of this critique. This is really an exercise in critical analysis.
It is. It's about holding a claim accountable to a pre-existing standard, not inventing a new one after the fact. We're looking at the standards found within the biblical and historical tradition that preceded it.
Okay, so let's unpack that framework right away. The sources give us a structural roadmap. It's based on 4 overarching objective tests.
And these tests are the backbone of the entire critique. They'll organize our whole discussion today.
So, test 1, prophetic consistency with prior revelation. Does the new message actually align with what God has previously established?
That's the big one.
Then test 2, accuracy of prophetic claims. This is essentially historical reliability. Does the claim hold up to verifiable facts?
Facts on the ground, so to speak.
Test 3 is moral and theological coherence. Is the content and even the lifestyle of the prophet consistent with established ethical and divine patterns?
You can't separate the message from the messenger's life, according to this test.
And finally, test 4, historical reliability of the message itself. Was it transmitted reliably? Is there early independent support for it?
And you know, that structural roadmap is the whole value proposition for you, the learner. When you encounter any high-stakes truth claim, political, philosophical, religious, whatever, you need objective measuring sticks.
You can't just rely on feeling.
No. The rigor we're applying here is about holding new claims accountable to existing established criteria. It's not about just accepting them on asserted authority. It teaches consistency in your own analysis.
That's a great point. If you commit to a certain standard of truth, you have to apply that standard universally.
You have to.
So let's jump right into the first 2 points of this critique. They deal directly with contradiction and historical reliability, starting with test number 1, the contradiction of earlier revelation.
Okay. So the primary critique, the real anchor, is this deep foundational principle of biblical revelation. It's sourced directly from Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy 13, right?
That's the one. And this passage, which the material cites very prominently, establishes an absolute, almost severe test for any claimed prophet who comes on the scene after the law was established.
And what is it about this ancient rule that makes it so decisive in this critique?
Well, it states that if a prophet arises and he seeks to lead the people away from the established revelation, the Torah, the law, that prophet is false.
Okay, that seems straightforward.
But here's the essential point, the part the critique really highlights. This disqualification holds true even if the prophet performs signs or claims wonders.
Wow.
And crucially, it even holds true if they claim to have received a message from an angel or had a vision.
So the message itself overrides any credentials the messenger might have.
Exactly. The message is the final test, which means, according to this argument, the divine standard itself provides a kind of preemptive rejection mechanism.
And this is where the source material presents this fundamental conflict. Muhammad is cited as explicitly contradicting core teachings found in those preceding texts.
Yes, the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospel, what's often called the Injil in Islamic tradition.
And we're not talking about minor details here, are we?
No, not at all. The contradiction isn't peripheral, it's fundamental. The sources focus on 4 central theological pillars that are either denied or, drastically altered.
So what's the first one?
The first, and probably the most historically significant, is the denial of the crucifixion of Jesus. That's found in the Qur'an.
And the other 3 critical areas of denial, what were they?
They're all interwoven with the Christian understanding of, salvation. The critique cites the denial of the sonship of Christ, that unique relationship between Jesus and God the Father.
Okay.
Third is the denial of substitutionary atonement. I mean, the entire concept that Christ's death was a necessary penal payment for the sins of humanity, that's gone.
And the fourth?
The fourth, the source claims, is a total revision and rewriting of the identity and the entire mission of the Messiah of Christ himself.
This is where that logical tension you mentioned becomes, well, it becomes a chasm, as the sources flag it.
It really does.
Muhammad affirms that Moses, David, and Jesus were true prophets. He says they received divine revelation. But if their core non-negotiable message was the necessity of a suffering, crucified, atoning Son of God,
Which is exactly what the foundational documents of the New Testament affirm.
then you have this insoluble paradox.
You do. The source material argues you just can't logically affirm the truth of the earlier messengers while at the same time denying the central foundational message for which they lived and, in some cases, died.
It's like saying you believe in the architect, but you deny the blueprint for the foundation.
That's a great way to put it. If the foundation is true, then the subsequent claim that dismantles that very foundation must, by the criteria of consistency, be false. It's a structural failure right from the start.
So to sum up this first test, according to the sources, the moment a new prophet denies something like the crucifixion or the sonship, which are affirmed by the prior revelation he claims to confirm, he fails. Test 1.
He fails it outright based on that Deuteronomic standard. The sheer scope of the contradiction is considered automatically disqualifying.
Okay, that's a very clear, very stark line. Now this leads directly into the next test, which shifts from theology to history.
Yes, this is a crucial transition. Test 1 dealt with theological consistency. Test 2 shifts the ground to empirical evidence and historical reliability.
And it focuses specifically on that first point you mentioned, the denial of the crucifixion.
Exactly.
This is where the argument shifts from, let's say, internal theological logic to external historical scrutiny.
Oh.
And the sources here are emphatic.
There.
They state that the crucifixion of Jesus under Pontius Pilate is cited as one of the best attested facts of ancient history. We're talking about a consensus that goes way beyond religious belief.
And that consensus is the key. You have to ask, what defines a best attested fact in ancient history?
What does it mean?
It means the event is supported by multiple, early, and diverse primary sources. And that includes sources who are hostile to Christianity.
So not just followers who might have a reason to, make it up.
Absolutely not. We're talking about historical records, Roman administration documents, accounts from Jewish historians like Flavius Josephus and even Tacitus. They all confirm that Christ was executed by Roman authority. They had no Christian agenda.
The historical certainty, then, is extremely high.
As high as it gets for that period.
And yet, the counterclaim presented by Muhammad, recorded in the Qur'an, comes 6 centuries later.
At least 600 years removed from the event itself.
And it states, they did not crucify him, but it was made to appear so. This is the substitution theory, right?
Right. And this timing is the absolute core of the historical critique. When historians analyze ancient claims, proximity to the event is paramount. A claim made 600 years after the fact, well, it's already viewed with deep skepticism unless it can be supported by earlier intervening independent sources.
And what are the specific historical deficiencies the analysis points to regarding the substitution claim?
The claim is pretty much universally described by historians as late, isolated, and unsupported.
What does isolated mean in this context?
Isolated means it lacks any known eyewitness support, not just from Christian sources, but from any contemporary historical account, Roman, Jewish, anything that suggests Jesus survived or that someone else took his place on the cross.
So there are no parallel accounts from that time?
None. The earliest dissenting accounts only emerge well after the initial event, and mostly in, fringe Gnostic traditions, which themselves were far from the core historical centers. They weren't considered reliable even then.
So the analysis concludes that this creates this massive historical and prophetic dilemma.
It does. The source posits a very difficult choice for you to make. Either every single earlier witness, the disciples, the Romans, the contemporary historians, the entire socio-political record of Judea, was completely wrong about a very public execution.
Which seems almost impossible for a consensus fact.
It's an almost impossible scenario. Or Muhammad received historically inaccurate information 600 years later.
And the consequence for prophetic reliability, according to this critique, is the main either way.
It is. A true prophet, speaking with divine authority, shouldn't contradict a settled, known historical fact. The claim, from a historian's perspective, simply fails test 2, historical reliability. It's too late, and it's completely unsupported against overwhelming earlier testimony.
What's really fascinating about this historical test is its objectivity.
Yes.
It doesn't rely on interpreting theological points or ancient languages. It relies on established historical methodology, things like source dating and the multiplicity of sources.
Right. If a revelation asserts a factual error about a major publicly known event, the prophetic claim is undermined. Full stop.
We've established a really rigorous standard here, linking the internal consistency of theology with the external consistency of historical fact. This is the level of rigor that really defines a true deep dive.
And that kind of rigor, it demands a strong foundational understanding of history, of theology, and of textual analysis.
And if the intensity of this discussion has sparked your intellectual curiosity, if you realize you need the underlying frameworks to properly analyze and evaluate these kinds of ancient claims, we want to point you toward an indispensable resource.
This is for you, the learner.
We want to encourage you to take advantage of an incredible opportunity right now. Just visit https://shop.beacons.aak2020 Tyrannical Bible College. That's all one word.
To truly engage with the criteria we're discussing today, the Deuteronomic tests, the apostolic warnings, the historical background of the crucifixion, you really do need systematic, structured education in these ancient sources.
And you can get free Bible College online right in your inbox from Tyrannical Bible College or THBC. There is absolutely no need to travel hundreds of miles to go to college. All you need is your phone and an internet connection.
Start today.
Start today. And tell all your friends who are hungry for this kind of deep knowledge. Again, that's https://shop.beacons.aak2020 Tyrannical Bible College. Invest in your intellectual foundation today. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are now diving deep into the core area of theological coherence, and we're addressing 5 distinct, pretty complex points of critique that are presented in our source material. We're going to start with test number 3. Confusion regarding Christian doctrine.
The logical premise of this test is, well, it's simple, but it's also profound. If a new prophet claims to be divinely guided to correct or purify or restore the faith of previous prophets,
Then they have to know what that faith actually is.
at an absolute minimum, yes. They must demonstrate a perfect understanding of the beliefs they are supposedly correcting. Any errors would be a major red flag.
And the primary example cited by the critique, the one that they say demonstrates a profound misunderstanding, is the Quranic representation of the Christian Trinity.
Exactly. The critique highlights references where the Trinity is repeatedly misunderstood as consisting of God, Jesus, and Mary.
Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Yes, the source material is very clear on this. This is a severe and fundamental factual error. Christianity has never, in any major Orthodox tradition, ever taught that Mary is part of the Godhead.
So where would that idea even come from? This error points to a larger problem of, source material, doesn't it? Why would Muhammad have encountered this specific misunderstanding?
That's a great question, and historians and theologians have a likely answer. The misunderstanding probably arose from Muhammad's interactions with marginalized or heretical sects.
Not mainstream Christianity.
No, not at all. Groups like the Marianites or certain Gnostic groups that were common in Arabia at the time, which had elevated Mary to a near-divine status. The source material argues that a true prophet receiving direct revelation from an all-knowing God would have been granted a perfect, precise understanding of Orthodox Christian doctrine.
Not the version from a fringe group.
Correct. So the implication is that the source of the information was secondhand, local, and inaccurate rather than divine. It suggests a theological misunderstanding or a conflation of ideas.
Which means it fails test 3. An error about the core doctrine it seeks to supersede undermines its own claim to superior divine clarity.
It's the difference between hearing a rumor about a belief system and having the actual creator of that belief system explain it to you perfectly. The critique suggests the information was more like a rumor.
Okay, let's move on. We'll skip ahead to test number 5, which brings us back to the source of the revelation itself. This is the angelic revelation test.
Right. We know that Muhammad's first revelation came from the angel Jibril, or Gabriel.
And we already established that Deuteronomic warning, signs or angels do not validate a contradictory message.
But the critique also brings in the New Testament standard, specifically a really critical counterwarning from the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Galatians.
Remind us of the exact stakes of that verse. It's a powerful one.
It is. It says, "Even if we or an angel from heaven preach another gospel, let him be accursed." The language is completely uncompromising.
So the issue here is theological completion.
Yes. The source material argues that the apostolic message, the gospel of Christ's death, resurrection, and atonement, is presented as final and complete. There's no room for a sequel that changes the plot.
So the crux of this test isn't whether Muhammad saw an angel, but rather what the angel said.
Precisely. Since the message delivered by Jibril, according to this critique, fundamentally redefines the nature of God
Unitarianism instead of the Trinity.
and reconfigures
The
salvation
law instead of grace.
and completely denies Christ's core identity, denying his sonship and his crucifixion, it constitutes by that definition another gospel.
And according to that apostolic standard from Galatians, any new gospel is preemptively rejected, regardless of the messenger's power or origin. It's a crucial line in the sand established by the earlier revelation.
It is. The test is the content, not the container.
Let's move to test number 6. This one focuses on the internal logical contradiction of the claim that Muhammad came to confirm previous scriptures.
Right, and this claim is, well, it's undermined by the very contradictions we've already been talking about.
So how does the critique deconstruct this claim? The claim that the Qur'an confirms the Torah and the Gospel.
The critique lists three massive interconnected conflicts. First, as we've said, the contradiction of core historical events, like the crucifixion.
Okay.
Second, the denial of central theology, the Messiah's function, the Trinity, atonement. But the third point is vital. Confirmation implies one of two things.
How are they?
Either the original text was accurate and needed validation, or it was corrupted and the new prophet is here to restore the original, pure version.
And the sources note that Muhammad offers no concrete evidence of this supposed textual corruption. He never produces the alleged original Injil or a pristine gospel text that he's supposedly confirming.
That's a huge point in the critique. The only evidence of corruption presented is the new revelation itself. The logic boils down to this. The earlier scriptures are true unless they contradict my new revelation. Therefore, the old scriptures must be wrong where we disagree.
That sounds like a circular argument. It requires you to just accept the assertion without proof.
It's categorized in the source material as supersession by association, not confirmation. If you deny the core of a text, like the crucifixion, while claiming to confirm it, you're not confirming it. You are functionally replacing it under the guise of validation.
It's a redefinition, not a confirmation.
Exactly. Confirmation requires supporting the prior revelation, not dismantling its foundational elements. And the failure to produce the original text weakens the claim that corruption was even the problem to begin with.
Okay, let's widen the scope a bit to test number 8. This looks at the whole history of Revelation. The Christian viewpoint cited in the sources sees history moving towards something called progressive revelation.
Right. The idea that truth is revealed gradually, moving from shadow to substance, and it culminates in the complete clarity found in Christ.
It's a forward-moving story.
It's a movement toward greater intimacy with God and, frankly, higher ethical expectations. The critique views the core tenets of Islam, as presented by Muhammad, not as the next step forward, but as a deliberate reversal of this theological trajectory.
A regression.
A regression, yes.
How is this regression specifically categorized by the sources? Let's walk through those 4 critical reversals they mentioned.
Okay, first is the movement from God incarnate back to strict Unitarianism. Progressive revelation sees God fully entering history in the person of Christ, fulfilling the Old Testament promise of an Emmanuel, God with us.
And the critique's take on the reversal.
The critique argues that reverting to an absolute strict Unitarianism removes God's active, personal presence in history and his relational fulfillment of the covenants. It emphasizes transcendence, but at the expense of that necessary immanence.
Okay, what's the second shift?
The shift from grace back to law.
Explain that.
This reversal moves salvation from being a gift received through faith in Christ's atonement, an act of God's grace, back to a primary emphasis on works-based judgment and adherence to the law, or Sharia.
And the critique sees this as a step backward.
A major step backward, because the New Testament standard views the law as preparatory, something that shows you your need for a savior, but isn't sufficient for salvation itself.
And the third reversal.
The reversal from sonship back to servanthood only.
That's a big relational shift.
Huge. Sonship, in the biblical context, implies an intimate, adopted family relationship with God, secured through Christ. The source material argues that by insisting on servanthood only, the new revelation reverses the privileged access and relational intimacy offered in the new covenant. It returns the relationship to one solely of master and slave, or sovereign and subject.
And finally, the last one, the shift from love-based redemption to works-based judgment.
Right. The critique sees the emphasis shifting away from God's proactive, self-sacrificial love demonstrated on the cross as the foundation for redemption,
And shifting toward what?
toward a scale. A scale where a person's eternal destiny is determined purely by the balance of their good and bad deeds, but without any definitive assurance of salvation. This return to an uncertain system of works is categorized as a significant theological regression. It fails the test of progressive consistency.
Okay, that leads us to the final test in this section, test number 9, which is an internal problem with a specific title used for Jesus.
Yes, the title Al-Masih, the Messiah or the Christ.
And the critique acknowledges that Islam does affirm Jesus using this very important title.
It does. But the sources argue that retaining the title without its function makes it an empty title.
An empty title.
Yes. The term Messiah is deeply rooted in Hebrew and Jewish tradition. It signifies the anointed one, the anticipated fulfillment of the roles of the ultimate prophet, priest, and king. It comes with a job description.
And what specific necessary elements of the Messiah's mission does the source material argue that Islam strips away?
It removes the 3 pillars that give the title its meaning in the preceding revelation. First, suffering and atonement, which is the priestly role that addresses sin.
Okay.
Second, the resurrection, which validates the atonement and secures victory over death.
And third?
And third, kingship, the eventual rule over the nations.
So if Jesus is just a great prophet who miraculously escaped the cross, who performs no atonement, and whose primary mission is just to deliver a book and preach moral behavior,
Then the title Al-Masih is rendered meaningless. He becomes merely another messenger, indistinguishable in his core function from dozens of others.
so the critique argues that to use the most important title from the prior revelation, while systematically removing its substance, fails the test of doctrinal consistency.
Yes, because the title itself loses its internal coherence within the new religious context. The title itself suggests a greater mission than the system actually allows him to fulfill.
That completes our theological survey. A lot to process there. We're going to transition now into our final major section, which addresses moral character and the ultimate prophetic reliability required by the criteria established in the sources. We return now to test number 4, moral problems and divergence.
And it's really essential to reiterate the source's criteria here. This test is not based on personal dislike or 21st century values. It's based on analyzing the moral precedent that was established by earlier prophets and, ultimately, by Christ.
So the test is whether the prophet's life, their actions, and the laws that result from their teaching, whether they diverge significantly from the established and arguably higher moral standard of the preceding revelation.
Exactly. You're comparing it to a benchmark.
So what specifically is that established prophetic pattern that the sources use as the benchmark?
The benchmark involves self-sacrifice. It involves confrontation with political power, not accommodation to it, and a lifestyle that does not leverage prophecy for personal gain.
Can you break that down?
Sure. Biblical prophets call kings to repentance. They don't become kings. They suffer persecution, imprisonment, being forced to flee, or even death. And they fundamentally do not gain personal power, political rule, material wealth, or excessive sexual privilege as a result of their prophetic calling.
They're often poor and marginalized, aren't they?
Very often, yes. That's the pattern.
So how do the sources illustrate Muhammad's ethical divergence from this established pattern?
The critique cites several specific and well-documented examples. These include the sanctioning of polygamy beyond the biblical limits, the allowance for sexual access to female captives or slaves taken in war.
That's a significant one.
It is. Also, the transition toward the use of violence in holy war, or jihad, as a means of religious expansion, particularly in the later Medinan period of his life.
And there's one more point they make about special revelations.
Yes. The existence of specific, you might say convenient, revelations that appear to solve Muhammad's personal, domestic, or political problems.
That last point, the special revelations for personal benefit, seems especially problematic according to these criteria. Can you give a bit more detail on what the source material highlights there?
The source material focuses on instances where revelations appear perfectly timed to endorse an action that might otherwise be seen as scandalous or politically awkward.
Like what?
For example, the critique often cites the incident involving Muhammad's marriage to Zainab bint Jahsh. She was the former wife of his own adopted son, Zayd.
That would have been a major social taboo.
A huge one. And a revelation appeared that conveniently annulled the prior custom against marrying the former spouse of an adopted son. This allowed the marriage to proceed, and it removed the stigma. The critique sees this as highly suspect.
It creates a deep suspicion regarding the source and the motivation of the revelation itself, according to the critique.
It does, but the fundamental power dynamic is the starkest contrast they draw. Jesus, the pinnacle figure of the earlier revelation, suffered the ultimate rejection and was crucified under the existing political power.
And Muhammad.
Muhammad, conversely, became a successful political ruler, a military commander, and a lawgiver who amassed both power and wealth.
So the source argues that this divergence from the precedent of self-denial and suffering in favor of power acquisition represents a failure of moral consistency.
Yes. The prophet's life should be a reflection of the sacrificial message, and the sources argue that's clearly not the case here.
Okay, let's look at test number 7. This takes us back to the classical, objective method of testing prophecy, rooted again in Deuteronomy 18.
This is the definitive test of divine knowledge. Can the prophet actually foretell the future?
What are the two non-negotiable requirements for a prophet to be considered true by this standard?
First, the prophet has to give specific, falsifiable prophecies.
What does falsifiable mean?
It means it can't be vague. It has to be measurable and verifiable. If I predict something good will happen to a great leader, that's not falsifiable. If I predict King Nebuchadnezzar will conquer Tyre, that is, you can check the history books.
And the second requirement?
Second, those prophecies must come true in a way that is independently verified, outside of the prophet's own manipulation or military achievement.
We see this historical precedent with prophets in the Old Testament, making very concrete predictions.
Exactly. Think of Isaiah naming Cyrus the Great centuries before he rose to power. That is a testable, falsifiable prophecy. The source material argues that Muhammad's record stands poorly against this very high bar.
How so?
He is cited as making relatively few predictive prophecies, especially when you compare it to the vast prophetic literature of the Bible.
And what is the classification of the prophecies he did make, according to the critique?
They are often described as being either extremely vague, like general predictions about the end times, which many people make, or as being self-fulfilling.
Self-fulfill.
A self-fulfilling prophecy is when the prophet uses his own authority to make the prophecy come true. If Muhammad prophesied that Mecca would be conquered, and then he personally led the army that conquered Mecca, that's seen as a statement of intent backed by force.
Not a test of divine, independent foreknowledge.
Exactly. It doesn't prove supernatural insight. Furthermore, the sources note that many of these prophecies were only recorded and authenticated much later by his followers, so they lack that independent, contemporaneous verification required by the classical test.
So for the critique, the inability to provide clear, specific, and independently verifiable future predictions constitutes a failure of Test 7.
Yes, a clear failure.
All right. Our final point of critique delves into a theological mechanism within the Qur'an itself. This is test number 10, which addresses the concept of internal Quranic tensions, specifically a doctrine called abrogation, or nask.
Right. And nask is a complex but crucial concept to understand.
So let's define nask clearly.
Nask is the doctrine where an earlier revealed verse of the Qur'an is explicitly canceled, replaced, or superseded by a later revealed verse. This implies a change in divine instruction or command over the course of the prophet's ministry.
A change in God's mind, so to speak. This raises a profound issue for consistency, doesn't it?
A profound issue.
What specific ethical tensions are cited as resulting from this doctrine?
The most commonly cited ethical inconsistency in the source material involves the tension between verses revealed early in Mecca, which called for peace, tolerance, and patient endurance in the face of persecution.
Okay, the peaceful verses.
And later verses, revealed during the Medinan period when he had military and political power, that sanctioned conflict, holy war, or violence for the purpose of religious expansion.
And the later verses are seen as canceling the earlier ones.
Yes. The critique argues that the latter, more militant verses are often deemed to abrogate the earlier, peaceful verses.
If God's commands can change over time, depending on the prophet's political status or strength, what does that imply about the nature of divine truth itself?
That is the philosophical core of the problem, according to this critique. It raises an extremely difficult dilemma. If divine truth, wisdom, and command can be canceled or corrected by a subsequent later divine truth, it fundamentally undermines the very concept of definitive, timeless, and eternal truth.
It suggests God's will is contingent on human circumstances.
Exactly. Which is a problem. So what's the resulting uncertainty for the believer who relies on this revelation?
That's the key question.
It creates a state of perpetual flux regarding ultimate authority. How can you definitively know which revelation is the final authoritative command if an earlier one can be canceled at any time? Does the meaning of truth change with the geopolitical situation?
It's a moving target.
It is. The critique asserts that this internal tension is destabilizing and stands contrary to the biblical expectation of a cohesive, consistent, and completed revelation that does not require internal correction. The source argues this is a fatal flaw in the claim of eternal consistency.
That brings us to a really compelling summary of this complex and deeply structured analysis.
Let's quickly reinforce the sheer rigor of the methodology we just explored. The source material provides what it calls a comprehensive failure summary. It asserts that Muhammad fails all the major evaluation tests when judged by the criteria established in the preceding biblical and historical standards.
And this isn't a partial critique. It's a systematic dismantling based on those 10 points. Failure on agreement with prior revelation.
Deuteronomy 13.
Failure on historical accuracy.
The crucifixion.
Failure on doctrinal clarity.
The Trinity error.
Failure on moral consistency. Failure on the angelic message test from Galatians. And failure on providing independently verified predictive prophecy. It's a clean sweep, according to the sources.
And for you, our learner, the true takeaway here is not the conclusion itself, but the template for critical analysis used to reach it. What stands out to you now should be the power of methodical examination.
Right.
When you confront any major truth claim, you must ask, is it historically supported? Is it logically consistent with its own asserted foundations? Does it align with established moral precedents? This framework allows you to move beyond just feeling overwhelmed by information.
And to become a rigorous evaluator of truth.
That's cool.
Before we get to our final provocative thought, we have to emphasize a critical distinction that's contained in the sources regarding application. While the analysis is sharp, it is unwavering in its critique of the prophetic claims.
But it clearly and strongly calls for a respectful and loving approach toward individuals.
This is crucial.
Absolutely. The source material mandates what it calls an important clarification. The critique is strictly limited to Muhammad's prophetic claims, and it is not about Muslims as individuals. This is a scholarly theological debate about doctrine and history. It is not a personal condemnation.
And the sources affirm that Muslims are often sincere, moral, and spiritually seeking people who deserve the utmost respect.
And that defines the Christian mandate for conduct cited here. The critique explicitly states that Christianity requires love, honesty, and respect toward all individuals, while simultaneously insisting on the necessity to examine all truth claims critically and without compromise.
You have to separate the argument from the person in the pursuit of truth.
That ethical line is non-negotiable. It's essential for any kind of informed, respectful engagement.
Okay, that's a perfect place to land before our final thought.
We spend this time dissecting the need for consistency, permanence, and historical reliability. And our final point, Test 10, raised the most profound philosophical challenge regarding abrogation, or nask.
The idea of verses being canceled.
Yes. So, based on this evidence of internal tensions, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to consider. If a claimed methodology of divine revelation allows for God's explicit commands and eternal truths to be canceled or revoked over time,
Then what?
then how can a follower ever establish definitive, timeless, and absolute truth? And what specific external criteria would be required for the believer to definitively judge that the revelation is finally completed and that no further abrogation is pending?
That uncertainty about finality is the lingering question left by the critique.
It is.
A truly complex thought to mull over. And if you want to continue this journey of deep, critical study of historical and theological sources and gain the intellectual tools you need to answer questions like these, we want to remind you one last time about the incredible resource we mentioned earlier.
The rigor demonstrated today really does demand a foundation. This resource provides that foundation for you.
Visit https://shop.beacons.aakk10 2020 Tyrannosaurus Bible College. That's all one word right now.
This is your opportunity to build the framework for critical thinking and theological knowledge that we utilize throughout this entire deep dive.
You can get free Bible College online in your inbox from Tyrannosaurus Bible College, THBC. There is no need to travel hundreds of miles to go to college. All you need is your phone and an internet connection.
It's an amazing opportunity.
Start today and tell all your friends who are seeking this kind of detailed knowledge. Once again, that's https://shop.beacons.aa 2020 Tyrannosaurus Bible College.
Thank you for allowing us to guide you through this intensely structured material today. We really hope this deep dive has equipped you to analyze historical and theological claims with more clarity and with intellectual rigor.
Always be curious, always be respectful, and keep diving deep into the material. We'll see you next time.